Okay, good morning. This is Lauren Barker. I'm the CEO of Cape Cod Young Professionals, and I'm happy to be joined here today by Warren Rutherford of the Executive Suite for our third in a series of 6 video podcasts presented by CCYP, which we are calling Shaping the Cape, the video podcast series. So welcome, Warren. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm glad to be with you and look forward to the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to start out by just learning a little bit more about and sharing with our audience a little bit more about you and what it is that you do at the Executive Suite. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So at the Executive Suite, I do a combination of executive search and recruitment, as well as a good amount of executive and management coaching. So have our offices located here in Hyannis, Mass, and enjoy working with clients on Cape and off Cape, and oftentimes with a coaching piece across the globe.
Excellent. So you and I actually met at Cape Space. So Warren houses up at Cape Space in one of their offices, and we've run into a lot of great people there, and you being one that we've been able to meet and connect with. The Executive Suite, really one of the things that you and I had talked about and why we wanted to do this session, which is presented by the Executive Suite and sponsorship. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
This session, really, we're going to focus on leadership through a crisis, which we had covered in some of CCYP's previous virtual programming, crisis management, which is pretty different. I think when we talk about leadership, you and I were chatting offline before this podcast session, and you have some pretty distinct views on what a leader is versus a manager, although they're often used interchangeably. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, and in part, the differences may equate to the size of the company as well. So I often equate leadership as something that you earn from your employees. You just can't walk into a company and say, hey, I'm the leader. You have to earn that designation. Managers, larger companies, on the other hand, are the ones who are charged with implementing, and leaders in larger companies are the ones that sort of set the tone, set the policy, set the direction, and rely on their managers to execute. In smaller companies, however, it's really hard to split the difference between the two, so it's often one and the same. Particularly here on the Cape, those owners are the leaders and the managers, so they have a dual role.
Yeah, that can get a little tricky, I think, during times like we're in right now as well, which, during this pandemic and all the difficulties that arise from a situation like this, leadership becomes especially important, but also management does too. There's a expected navigation, I guess, through a crisis like this, and it's unlike anything most leaders or managers have prepared for prior to that. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in your role, and I guess your recommendations, skills, tactics, anything that you would speak to during a time like this?
Sure. I think that in a crisis situation, whether it's a natural disaster or the pandemic that we're going through now, leaders and managers need to understand what they need to do to manage and lead effectively. And oftentimes that requires us to take a wider, more holistic view, to look at challenges and opportunities and essentially develop a plan of action that allows us to anticipate the steps we need to take to lead our group and our troops and our employees successfully through, in this instance, a crisis, a pandemic. So that wider view is going to focus on leading, and managing focuses on the doing. So for me, when you're looking at leading someone through a group of people through the crisis, you're needing to understand how you need to delegate and trust those who you're working with as managers or as staff to make effective decisions, and then to lead them by providing them the support and the guidance they need with that whole overview in mind. And we don't have the luxury to control everything as a leader and a manager in a crisis. So we need to understand, you need to decentralize that control. You need to enable staff to be able to implement. You're guiding them, but you're not doing everything. You need to be there as the leader and the manager to provide them the principles and values that they need to follow and remind them to follow them. And when there's a question that they have, be available for them to answer those questions, but make sure you're focusing on the planning, not the doing, as much as possible.
Okay, so it's really an exercise, in your opinion, of kind of letting go of control and instead providing a framework, a value system, as you said, for people to operate within. So what gets done and how it's being done isn't necessarily the focus of the leader. It's more the big picture framework aspect of it. But then
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How is that different from, say, a natural disaster in a situation like we're in right now? How would that differ?
There's very little difference, actually. In a natural disaster, you need to create the overall plan. And by creating that overall plan, marshal the various pieces and elements to that plan together so that when a disaster occurs, you've anticipated what you need to do, how you need to respond to it, when you need to respond to it, and what types of resources you need. And then as that disaster unfolds, you're now acting to address the situations that are evolving. So you're, in many respects, I'm likening it to the conductor in an orchestra. You're asking the various instruments and different movements to that plan to act and to respond and to play. What's often important, though, in a natural disaster, as it will be within this crisis of the COVID-19, is recovering from that disaster. And usually with a hurricane or a tornado, the end of the disaster is fairly distinct. You know, the tornado's gone by, the hurricane's gone by, and now you're picking up the pieces and recovering. With the pandemic, the end is not quite clear yet. And so we need a good amount of patience and guidance to understand what our roles need to continually to be. And I think that the guiding principle, you know, and I'll use the example of Governor Baker in Massachusetts here, he's playing that role of the conductor, of that leader, and ensuring the message that the crisis isn't over. It's going to be continuing, and it's going to need our continued diligence and response. So asking us to partake in certain activities, events, and actions that will lead us through the crisis with the eventual hope that there's going to be a vaccine. But even with that, the crisis is not over. And I think that the challenge in this particular instance, as distinct from a natural disaster, Lauren, is that there's no defined end in sight. And so it requires the leader and the managers to all be continually adapting. And what that contributes to, in many respects, is business owners and employees, and then kids at school, to continue to experience levels of uncertainty. And as they continue to experience those levels of uncertainty, it's up to the leaders and the managers, I would submit, to try to provide individuals and companies levels of certainty, levels of expectation. So yesterday, as an example, we saw Governor Baker provide some levels of certainty. He announced what phase one opening of businesses would be, with certain criteria in mind that everyone had to meet. So that level of certainty is now known. You know, I might be able to get my hair cut in the next 2 or 3 weeks. God forbid I'd have to go back to years ago when it was below my shoulders. Mustache for that matter.
Haircut soon.
You know, but that's a level of certainty that's been prescribed, but you have to call and make an appointment. You have to wear a face mask. There has to be social distancing involved. So those three levels of certainty that I just mentioned there provide good expectations for people to plan around. So this crisis, different as a health crisis, different than a natural disaster, is very distinct. And I think it's going to continue to be very challenging for people to adapt with it. The key is what I call, and I tell my neighbors and my friends, you have to have patience and you have to have understanding. There's not one size fits all, and you do need to be willing to adapt and able to adapt if you can.
Right, because I think, to your point, one of the really distinct things about this whole situation is that there is a large degree of uncertainty, but also a large degree to which, companies and organizations have not had the opportunity to prepare necessarily for something like this. Now, larger organizations, government organizations, yes, but your typical small business, while they may have a hurricane preparedness plan or a fire emergency plan for evacuation of their building, many did not have the infrastructure or the plan in place to deal with something like this. So for a leader, kind of sticking with that example of Governor Baker, since he's one of the more visible examples that we can use right now, there is a large amount of work that's going on behind the scenes to be able to sort of filter out all the information in a way that sets those clear expectations that you're referring to. In that instance, what can a leader really do in those behind the scenes moments? What sort of principles or strategies might guide their own thinking so that they can then filter that out and set those clear expectations for the people that are working with them?
Well, a couple of thoughts, and come back to that last comment you made, the people who are working for them. Your employees drive your business success or failure. Your employees are your front line. Yes, as the leader, as the owner, as the manager, you're representing that business, in a public face to a degree, but your employees are the face of your business. They produce and they serve customers and clients. So the most important principle I can think of is putting in place a good caring for your employees, a strong, sincere caring and caring about your employees. It's easy to forget them. And if you forget them, your business can disappear quite quickly. So one of the guiding principles I have is putting in place plans and procedures to respect and care for your employees. It may sound a little squishy, so be it. But I need to make sure that my employees, when I'm going through a crisis, are understanding that I care about them. So, in a natural disaster, and it's not that much difference here with the crisis, but in a natural disaster, it was common for me to be able to go out and talk to my work crews who are responding to a particular disaster. One comes to mind with hurricanes. Not that I'd operate a chainsaw, that'd be a little bit dangerous for me in street clothes, but I'd be there talking to my troops. I'd be working with my police officers or firefighters to help to make sure that they're getting the support they need, the front line. No different in a business. If you have employees, care about them, let them know you care, and let them know that you're willing to accept input to improve and modify that plan, because oftentimes they're the ones in contacting our customers and our clients who, I don't want to say know best, but know differently, and their input is vital. And to your point of making the assumption that businesses may not have plans, they may not have disaster recovery plans, they may not have business plans. So it's important to give them simple principles. So you're preparing, and I liken it to understand what the past is, what the present is, and what the future can be. And based on that, how can you develop a simple, implementable disaster plan that will help you survive and recover a crisis, a pandemic, a disaster? Keeping it simple is really important. So, looking at taking care of your lenders, your vendors, your employees, your customers, and be truthful and honest as you're going through that whole crisis. It's really important now, I think, more than ever, to be in contact with all four of those groups. And if you're not, then your lenders and your vendors are wondering what's going on. If you look at the different restaurants that are doing takeout, curbside pickup, or delivery, they've adapted their business model in order to respond to the limitations put on them with this crisis. So when you go into when you call up to a restaurant, they're going to advise you, here's the menu, here's what's available for takeout, here's what the pricing is, and then you can pick it up. Oftentimes it's being done now online. Some are done by phones, but they have limited employees available to do that service. That's their adapted plan for the crisis. When they can go back full stream, are they going to, and this is part of their uncertainty as a restaurant, are they going to be required to maintain social distancing? So if so, are they going to have to cut their occupancy in half in order to make that distance? I saw a piece this morning in Maryland where the restaurants have actually reconstructed not desks but tables where customers can go, so that there's a barrier between them and the next table. Creative, innovative, but does it comply with the state or the federal government, state in this instance, requirements? So they all have to adapt to that. So on an ongoing basis, there's some level of uncertainty, but once they know what the requirements are, they can get creative and adapt. I think in New Hampshire, I saw a report last night on the news that New Hampshire is allowing outside dining only. So in 50-degree weather, you bring a jacket if you want to dine outside, I guess.
Yeah.
That's their adaptation. Once they know what the rules are, they can adapt and they can respond.
Well, and I think that's the big sort of pivot point of it, is knowing what those regulations or different circumstances are going to be, what they're going to look like. And, in of restaurants, I think there's still a large degree of uncertainty for them. And so you kind of, as a leader, I think, can fall into this pit of hypothetical thinking, if this happens, then this. What are your thoughts on that, and how a leader could navigate, that whole situation where you're just constantly thinking, and how can you organize your thoughts, I guess? Any tools or tips for that?
Be consistent and be realistic, and then be willing to consider the wild and crazy. One of my friends, and I don't consider this wild and crazy, but he's a former FEMA employee, Federal Emergency Management employee. And he told me years ago that the federal government had planned for all different types of contingencies. So I said, okay, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, take for an example, a high-speed boat comes sailing up or cruising up the Potomac River and decides to decimate the IRS building. Okay, fine. I said, yeah. And he goes, within an instant, say 60 seconds, the IRS building in East Oshkosh, Wisconsin, or wherever it's located, it's a secret location, is up and running. The main one in Washington's been destroyed, but a duplicate is now up and running in a different location in the United States. And so their recovery plan in that particular disaster, not a wanted one, obviously, is to have duplication. And so they went through all these different scenarios and looked at, and this was just one example, but in this particular scenario, it was duplication. There are other contingencies they planned for and documented and funded. This is the federal government level. So think of any federal agency, any federal function, there's some type of recovery plan for that function to continue once a disaster hits it. We don't know what they all are. Some of them are, I'm sure, secret, but he gave that as an example of a reasonable contingency plan. We
Yeah.
don't know. In our instances, bringing it down to local government, bringing it even further to local businesses, what types of contingencies are realistic for us? We need to communicate, again, with our lenders and our vendors. We need to communicate and engage our employees. And then once we develop those contingencies, we need to inform our customers and our clients. Otherwise, they don't know we exist. So if I need to be able to get a haircut next week, I need to be able to know that I can call up the barber or hairdresser, take your pick, and set an appointment up at a specific time. So that helps create certainty for the client, and it helps the employees understand where they're going to be at a particular time during their response. And they understand also what types of protocol they need to put in place to respond appropriately. Does that help?
Yeah. So where the employees fit in to that whole picture is going to be included in that plan. So it sounds like there are some key components, but overall, just hearing you speak, I'm struck by you kind of need a strong stomach to go through those mental exercises of, the crisis. I think that a lot of people in leadership roles are probably already doing that, but maybe just not in the organized, systematic sense of what you're referencing, where, okay, here's the scenario. We've got this crisis. How, what's the plan of how we would respond? Where, who do we notify? All those sorts of things.
So, well, here's a couple of thoughts. So break it down simple, because I'm a firm believer in KISS. Crisis preparation, crisis execution, and then crisis recovery. How can you guide your business to your desired outcomes? You need to define what those desired outcomes are. And then here's some other principles: lead decisively, continuously frame the crisis, evolve with it. And with COVID-19, that's critical. Frame it and evolve with it. It's it's not so much continuous improvement, it's continuous involvement and evolving and change. Third is actively communicate, and I've talked about that with your vendors, your lenders, your employees, and your customers. Anticipate the unexpected. Recognize people are going to respond differently when under pressure. So you may respond differently if I ask you to undertake a different task, a particular task now. But a month or two from now, given the circumstances, you may respond totally differently.
Yeah.
I don't know that. You don't know that. It's something we find out when it happens. So your plan has to be adjusted to changing realities. The tools and technology limitations that you have need to be understood. If we did not have the ability to do a video chat over Zoom, then how would we communicate that? Will we do it just by a podcast where it's over the phone? Would we do it in person? How would you do it? How would you adapt? So the fifth one is seek actionable intelligence. Sounds a little wonky, but be open to a variety of sources that you can rely on. Question their reliability. Look for multiple viewpoints to provide you more informed strategies. So one size doesn't fit all. So I'm a consumer of information, sometimes too much, my wife tells me. But, I'll look at various news reports. I'll look at various speakers. I'll listen to various points of view and perspectives, all with the idea of informing how I'm going to develop a decision tree process and implement it. Doesn't have to be complicated, but just don't rely on Fox News. Just don't rely on WBZ. Don't rely on Governor Baker. Look at what different states are doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it, so that you give you as a business owner different perspectives. I was talking with a person this morning from South Carolina and asked them, given they wanted to do a search. So given the state of COVID-19 in Massachusetts versus South Carolina, how important is it for them to conduct a search now? And the response I got was, we are totally wide open. Everybody's able to do everything. The only issue is everybody doing everything on the beach this past weekend caused a lot of issues. So we, as local government, need to deal with it. So
Yeah.
I laughed and they said, yeah, I said, if that's the only issue we have, that's okay. But their recovery response to the disaster was, different than what we might consider in opening beaches on Cape Cod. So it's
Right.
a little bit different. But look at the crisis life cycle that you're managing, not just the event. So take, as that leader, take that longer view. And if you can take that longer view, the people you work with and the people who work for you and the people who benefit from your goods and services will appreciate that. So if you're in a crisis going, oh my God, what am I going to do now? That doesn't particularly engender trust in the people who are expecting you to lead. So try to take that longer view. It's really important. And then
Thoughtful and measured, it sounds
readiness, preparation, follow-up. I think
like.
every time I've gone through a natural disaster, and not necessarily the COVID-19, but when I've worked through natural disasters, everyone looked to me for guidance. Now, the first time, I'll be honest, I had no clue what I was doing, but people still looked to me for guidance, and I had to quickly get up to speed and provide that guidance, and it helped. And when in the old days, you used to have natural disasters, hurricanes, you used to have what were called civil defense directors. They were part-time individuals who were great at running radios. So somehow they knew a politician who appointed them or anointed them a civil defense director. Disaster struck, and this is no joke. You called into a bunker, and all this 1950s era radios and gas packs and all this stuff was in place. And I looked around, this is 1985. And I said, I don't think I'm going to use a gas mask in this hurricane. I don't think we're going to use this radio. It hasn't been used in like 30 years. So I looked at the police chief, the fire chief, the public works director, and I said to the public works director, okay, we've got a hurricane coming. What's that tell you? A lot of trees are down. I said, buy all the chainsaws you can get. Where from? I said, I don't really care. Take a police officer with you and a firefighter. So they did. And they went to the hardware stores and bought all the chainsaws. You know what? When the trees were down, our community was the first one to clear the roads. Did the same thing down here. So it's these folks look to you for guidance. So as that leader, I know it's not really easy to show calm, reserve, and leadership, but it's up to you as the owner of a business to help guide your employees and your customers through that. Just by giving them confidence, gets you trust, gets you respect. And then the plan doesn't become complicated because now I'm going to say, okay, Lauren, you're in charge of this area. What would you recommend? And wow, he's asking me my opinion. So you're going to think about it. So I'm engaging you in the process of solving the problem. And we do it, don't have a plan, we do it bit by bit.
Right.
And that perspective is important because honestly, one size doesn't fit all. And I don't know everything as a leader. I know some things. I know how to ask questions. I know how to listen. I know how to plan. So that's what, my expectation as a leader in a crisis is to be that conductor in the orchestra and enable a process where my experts can help guide me through that process and then recover through the process. Does that help?
It does. And I'm struck by too, as you're talking, you're giving examples from municipal or government management, but I think that I love the example of going into that bunker and seeing all the supplies and going, this is not the right fit for the scenarios that we're going to be thing. And so I think that a lot of leaders and small business owners may be feeling that right now, that they're kind of walking into their, metaphorical bunker in terms of what they had prepared for, and they equipped. And so what you're saying about responding to what's right in front of you, taking in information, and that really, regardless of the crisis that you're facing, there seem to be some commonalities in how you approach the situation and come up with your response to it. And a lot of it depends on listening and being flexible and just being honest, because I think there's a lot of there's a lot to be said for transparency and what you know and what you don't know as a leader, communicating that. But I know I've shared with you one of my favorite quotes. You're saying to present calm, that leadership is how well you hide your panic. And I've always really funny. It's, maybe not entirely true, but I think to some extent, people look to leaders to present that face of calm, and they model their behavior after that. So I think when people are looking to you, it becomes very important to take a deep breath and just, what do you know? What do you not know? And what's the problem that needs to be solved right in front of you?
I think you're absolutely correct. With every search process I go through for an executive, a leader, I ask the question, of the candidates, why would someone want to follow you? And well, because, I'm really important, I'm really good. No. Why would someone want to follow you? You're in a situation that requires you to be that leader. And just because you're the head of the organization, the head of the business, doesn't mean that they're automatically going to follow you and do what you say. You need to earn that respect. You need to earn that trust. So what is it in you that's going to help people want to follow you? And, when I ask that question of candidates for, executive positions, that's a great question. No one asked me that before. And I said, well, okay, next question. Because if they can't answer it for me, now they're going to be in a crisis situation and I'm going to have to follow them. It's going to be hard. So sincerity is really important. One of the things I look at in this particular crisis is that our local officials, our local business owners are adapting on the fly and adapting very well. And, one of the leadership areas that some people may say, well, they're deluging us with information. But, if I look at regionally, the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce is providing, in your organization, CCYP, is providing consistent information to its membership on what they need to do, what they need to plan for, what they need to prepare for. And there's consistency between what the federal government, the state government, and the regional chamber is saying, so that with that consistency, our expectations can pretty much be in sync and we can respond a lot easier. So, I give credit to those who are putting all that information out. If there was conflict and inconsistency, now as an owner, I'm going to be thinking about the uncertainty that that's engendering. But in these instances, it's not. So I don't want to say it's simple, but there's a guidepost that we can follow. And that helps the owners of businesses, the leaders in these crises, to adapt.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot to be said for just the amount of communication that has happened between a lot of the bigger organizations on the Cape, and there is a lot of consistency because I think everyone is talking to each other, and from the very beginning, everyone's been kind of keeping each other in the loop, and this whole project actually came out of a lot of those conversations where I realized we have the ability to bring those conversations to a public setting where people can be part of them in a different way, rather than those just happening, behind closed doors. on Zoom rather than at an executive table, but you get the sense of what I'm trying to.
Well, yeah, I do. And as an organization, you're adapting how you're delivering that information, so it's more consistent. And in your instance, more of a controlled environment, which is a necessity with Zoom
Yeah,
or type of virtual meetings.
right. So can you tell me, I guess, in light of everything that you've shared, and I love the simplicity of it and kind of the structure, and I'm picturing a nice Excel spreadsheet or a bullet point checklist because I'm a
Yeah,
planner and that's what I love
yeah.
to do, and cross things off. And I think a lot of people in management and leadership roles are that way. What is a leader doing right now in this current context? I know every day is a different day. We've just gotten some new information yesterday at the state level. You know, whether someone is middle management or supervising, you know, one or two people, or they're leading a whole organization or business. What does that look like right now?
They're assessing the information, I hope, and understanding how it relates to their specific business, their employees, their vendors, their customers. And I hope that they are developing a plan for reopening that will be as effective as it can be. Years ago, and I think this is appropriate, I coined a phrase that has guided me through my career, and it's very simple. The difficulty of the effort does not justify its dismissal. So it may be hard to understand, it may be hard to implement, but it doesn't mean that you have to dismiss it out of hand. The effort is required to keep your business going. A lot of people depend on you as a business owner and a leader to continue on. So figure it out. There's resources available to help you, to guide you through, and to create more certainty as you run through the pandemic. The easy answer is it's going to end tomorrow. It's not.
Yeah.
Our new normal is a certain level of uncertainty we need to be willing to adapt to and to change. And the more our employees and our customers understand that we can lead them through the crisis, I think the more successful we will be as business owners.
Excellent. So resources, you mentioned, you know, taking those in, assessing those. What would you suggest if people want more information, want to learn more, you know, outside of just the current events and taking in all that info? What would you suggest?
Well, I do think that it's going to benefit business owners to access what's available through the regional chambers of commerce, again, through CCYP, through your local chambers of commerce, your business associations, and accessing information through your local and state government. I think that on a local level, we're not accessing as much as we can. And the local boards of health and health departments have a good amount of control over what needs to be done and what will be done. So, whether it's a beach opening, whether it's serving people at a restaurant, that's controlled by health officials. So my sense is that if we can, as business owners, continue to be willing to access what's available and then engage in problem solving and sharing that information on platforms such as what you're making available, I think the more informed individuals are, business owners are, the better off we're all going to be. As I said earlier, Lauren, I know I don't have all the answers. I know that. I'm going to rely on other business owners to help inform me and guide me through my parts of the crisis, whether it's working here on Cape Space or working at home. It's important that we seek out each other and keep the conversation going. And then from that, develop the plan for it. As I said earlier, think crisis prep. We've done that. Now we're crisis execution. Now, what's crisis recovery for us look like as an individual business, as a Cape, as a community? And how can we together help to develop that?
Definitely. I think that continued peer-to-peer conversation is a really important one. Because often, you know, as you mentioned, you're looking out at what others are doing and learning from that. And in terms of strategies and just overall general leadership support, what would you recommend there?
I could say talk to a coach.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I have had individuals, business owners contact me and ask me for support. And that, you know, that's part of what I do. Um, you've also got an initiative going through CCYP on coaching.
Yep.
I
Just
think
launched that.
business and employees need to take advantage of that. Um, we need to be able to access outside experts to help us move through levels of uncertainty. And, you know, in my coaching practice, I have to say that if you look at your uncertainty, your significance, and your connection to yourself, that's all of what coaching deals with. And the first part of that is uncertainty. That's our foundation to who we are. And I spend a good amount of my time when I'm coaching, as other coaches do, helping individuals and groups and companies create certainty. Once we can get that resolved and solidified, then our different roles and how significant we feel about ourselves improves. But it's that foundation, that certainty piece that is critical. I spend probably 60% of my time on helping move people from uncertainty to certainty. And the rest is, I don't want to say it's a piece of cake, but that's the hardest part to get over as a coach.
Yeah.
So, you know, seek people out who are expert in those areas, whether it's, you know, through the programs you're offering and the programs I'm offering for coaching, or through other coaches in the Cape and regional area. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone or email folks and ask for help. You know, if you're a restaurant in a restaurant, maybe there is a restaurant association you can contact. They have best practices. They're evolving. You know, the National Restaurant Association has all that information available for restaurant owners. Local restaurants probably pay dues to them. You know, National Federation of Small Business, another organization that small businesses can access. There's a ton of information available that we pay dues to, that we pay subscriptions to.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to pick up the phone.
And this is the time when you make good on that. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Network for nonprofits is a great resource as well. That's one that we use frequently. And yeah, those organizations are dedicated to coming up with those policies and best practices and then advocating for their sector when it comes to implementing things that make the most sense. So you're absolutely right about that.
You don't need to reinvent the wheel. It was made a long time ago.
Well, Warren, thank you so much for your time. Any last minute thoughts or anything you want to add before we wrap it up for today?
Well, I want to thank you, Lauren, for giving me the opportunity to talk about leadership in a crisis. And just, again, thank your organization for all it's been doing for young professionals and others on the Cape since you were incorporated years ago. I've enjoyed seeing the organization grow and become more influential with younger professionals getting involved in their communities. And through business ownership, through involvement in your communities, and through involvement in local and regional government, I think the CCYP is making a huge difference. And I realize in a sense that's a plug, but it needs to be. What you've done for the community, what you continue to do is hugely important. So, you know, if professionals, whether they're young or old, have questions, they ought to seek you out and ask for your assistance and offer your assistance where they can. I think that's critically important. And I'm just happy to be able to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. I appreciate you saying all that. We've had a great legacy of leadership in this organization with our board and my predecessor, and it's a great honor every day to walk into. So I appreciate you saying all that.
You're welcome.
I encourage people to check out the executive suite if you have needs in the executive coaching or executive search realm of things. Warren has a lot of expertise in all aspects of this issue. And so if you need additional information, please check him out. We also, as he mentioned, have our new laser focused coaching service that we are kicking off. Just launched on this morning, actually, or yesterday on Monday, for our members for free. You can get 3 coaching sessions, 30 minutes each, for free as a member of CCYP. So definitely check that out if you are interested in that. So thank you again, Warren, and really enjoyed talking with you today. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge and expertise.
Likewise. Thank you, Lauren.
Great. Thank you.